My name is Friedemann Zippel. I'm happy to be here with you. I'm Principal Manager at the European Court of Auditors, 40 kilometers from Trier in Luxembourg. And it's not an easy job that I have now to speak after Professor Caranta, because it was so stimulating and inspiring. The topics you raised, the issues you raised are so very much interesting. We could spend the whole afternoon discussing them. Resilience, price versus strategic, fragmentation of legislation, more complex procedures or better regulated products, training, administrative capacity. I mean, really, we could have a discussion for the rest of today. Nevertheless, I will try to give you an interesting presentation now on our recent report on public procurement performance, on competition in public procurement over the last, over the period 2011 to 2021. And I think what we catched already during the whole day and also during the speech by Professor Caranta was that many people are suffering from the complexity of the system, from the complexity of the rules and all the conditions you have to meet. That's one thing. What we have seen when we did this audit is that competition in public procurement across the EU in almost all the member states is decreasing. So it seems that also the business side considers the public procurement framework, the rules, the conditions to be too complex, so that public contracts are not really attractive anymore. And I'm together here with public procurement experts from private, from administrations, from academia, lawyers. So there's no real need to discuss with you the definition of public procurement, of course. But I kept this slide here in the presentation from a presentation that I initially gave at the OECD a couple of weeks ago in our report. And I found it still interesting to compare the two definitions of public procurement as we have them in the EU directive and as we have them in the OECD public procurement framework. According to the directive, public procurement is the acquisition by means of a public contract of work, supplies, or services by one or more contracting authorities from economic operators chosen by the contracting authorities, whether or not the work, supplies, or services are intended for a public purpose. That's the definition. If you then go for the OECD definition, or definition, it's the process by which public authorities purchase work, goods, or services from companies. And I think only if you compare the two definitions, it reflects so nicely how complex the system is that we created in the EU and how much simplified it maybe could become in the future in order to make public procurement more attractive again, particularly also to companies. In 2014, as you know, we had a public procurement reform in the European Union, and the directives defined a number of objectives of the reform and of the directives. So there was the objective to simplification, to introduce more flexibility and to reduce administrative burden. Then there was an objective to increase the strategic use of public procurement to support policy objectives like green, like gender, like social. There was an objective to increase the participation of SMEs in public contracts, to ease the access for SMEs, to further digitalize procedures, to simplify, also to generate more transparency, to have more governance, to better governance, to have more sound procedures. So quite a variety of different objectives, and all these objectives, of course, have an impact on competition. And competition is what we looked at in the course of our audit. You know, of course, that the EU directives had to be transposed in national law, and that by 2018, all the EU member states had transposed the directives, some of them a little bit too late, but in principle today we should have the same basic public procurement rules in all the member states, even if they are then, of course, often complemented by not only additional EU rules coming from regulations, but also additional national and regional rules in many instances. You are familiar with the public procurement process, so I don't need to go into the details of that. We have a planning phase, contract notice, awarding of contract, contract award notice, performance of the contract. The entire process is designed in a way that potential bidders are informed as early as possible about upcoming public procurement opportunities and then about the award decisions so that the whole process is transparent. And this, of course, is a condition for competition in public procurement, because only if the public knows about the public procurement opportunities and then also the decisions taken, we can have competition. TED Electronic Daily is the online version of the supplement of the official journal of the EU dedicated to European public procurement. You know that. Why am I mentioning that here? Because our audit was based on TED data. So we did the first time ever big data analysis for the Court of Auditors or at the Court of Auditors. And we really went into TED and used the entire data set for the period 2011 to 2021 for all the EU member states in order to establish the public procurement trends as we report them in our report. You know that any public procurement above the thresholds laid down in the EU directives must be published in TED. So this is why TED for us was the data source, the database to use. Some of the member states also record procedures below the thresholds in TED. In the database, we excluded these procedures, these below threshold procedures, in order to have comparable data and results for the different member states. Public procurement makes about 13–14% of GDP, of EU GDP, every year in the EU. And it was interesting to discuss with OECD colleagues that also at OECD level, so including the US and Japan and Canada and all the other OECD countries, this is the same magnitude, more or less. So 13–14% of GDP belong to public procurement or are related to public procurement. So this gives us an idea of the magnitude of money involved in public procurement. And specifically in TED, every year contracts which are worth approximately 815 billion euros are published. And we took all of them into account in order to do our audit. The Court of Auditors every year looks at public procurement, but not from a performance point of view, from a compliance point of view. So every year we audit payments from the EU budget on the basis of statistical samples. And the traditional errors that we find are like discriminatory selection criteria, biased restrictive technical specifications, artificial splitting of contracts and wrong procedures, selection of bidders non-complying with selection criteria, incorrect evaluation of tenders, conflict of interest. These are the traditional errors, compliance errors, that we find when we look at public procurement. So when my director asked me to do an audit, a special audit on public procurement, in addition to what we do every year anyway, I was not very excited. And I just thought, hang on, guy, since 20 years, we are auditing public procurement again and again. What do you want? But I mean, if you think about these errors, these compliance errors, and if you link them to the question of competition, all of them can have, will have, in most of the cases, an impact on competition already. What I can say, and this is a good news, is that the number of serious public procurement errors that we find at the Court of Auditors when looking at member states' payments is decreasing over a number of years now. And we linked it to an indeed increased administrative capacity in EU member states as regards public procurement. But this statement is related to compliance with the rules. It's not related to performance of public procurement. Okay, now let's jump into our audit. That was a bit of background. We asked a number of audit questions. First, we asked whether the Commission measured the impact of the 2014 public procurement directives on the different objectives, or in relation to the different objectives laid down in the directive, and whether the Commission made effective use of available open data, so mainly TED, to monitor public procurement competition or competition in public procurement. And we also asked whether the Commission, in cooperation with the member states, identified reasons for weak competition and took mitigating action where needed. In the scope of this audit was a trend analysis based on TED data for the period 2011 to 2021, with an emphasis on direct awards and single bidding as main competition indicators. We also looked at the strengths and weaknesses of Commission and Member States monitoring tools to monitor public procurement performance. We asked Commission and Member States to which extent they might have identified root causes to the overall decline in competition that we expected when we started the audit, and that then also was confirmed through the audit work. And we wanted to discuss with the Member States and with the Commission the measures taken to reduce obstacles to competition. Audit work done, so we did this big data analysis on the basis of TED for the period 2011 to 2021. We reviewed the Commission's single market scoreboard as the Commission's main monitoring tool for public procurement performance. We held interviews with different DGs from the Commission. We reviewed the Commission public procurement strategies and communications. We reviewed country-specific recommendations issued by the European semester. We surveyed about 400 public procurement authorities in the EU member states. We interviewed 6 member states, and we had an expert panel with experts from OECD, academia, business, and administration. And Professor Sanchez, he made a contribution this morning, was one of the panelists that we had involved. Audit observations. First part, trend analysis. So one of the main competition indicators that is recognized is direct award. So the level of direct award that you see in a certain country and also EU-wide. And if you look at that, we need to keep in mind that direct awards, as you all know, should be the exception rather than the rule. So you can do a direct award if you are above the thresholds. If you have no bid received, you have launched an open procedure, no bid received, okay, then you are free to negotiate and to issue a direct award. Or in the case of natural disasters, you could go for a direct award, but this should be clearly the exception and not the rule. Nevertheless, the level of direct awards in the EU remained at around 16% over the 10 years period that we looked at. So there was no decrease in direct awards triggered by the directive. We have the best student in class for direct award, which is Greece. So Greece has a direct award rate of only some 5%. Whereas, for instance, Cyprus ranked at more than 40%, or ranked at the last place with more than 40%, 43% of all procedures resulting in a direct award. And this, of course, cannot be a satisfactory situation from a competition point of view, because if you go for a direct award, by definition, there is no competition. Now, if you look at the different sectors, because we also tried to understand a little bit better what's going on in different sectors, the situation is not homogeneous. In the energy sector, for instance, we had a steep increase from 16% to 29% of direct awards, whereas in engineering and financial services, for instance, we had quite some decrease or a positive development. So really, if you want to understand reasons behind limited competition, or also because behind good competition, you have to look at the different member states. You have also to look at different economic sectors. Now, when we do this presentation, we often get the question whether we took into account Corona. Yes, of course we did. If you look at the medical equipment box here, you can see a steep increase in 2021. So you can see that Corona here clearly had an impact. So you can see it. But nevertheless, as we did not look only at the years 20 and 21, but as we established trends over a 10 years period, we think that even if here and there might be an effect of the Corona pandemic for the years 20 and 21, overall our results are valid to make general conclusions or to draw general conclusions. Let's move on. Number of bidders too small. Also, when we think about single bidding, or this is also expressed by the fact that the single bidding rate in the European Union is too high. Single bidding means that you launch a procedure and you receive only one bid. And then, of course, if you only receive one bid, what's your choice? Either you reject and you cancel the procedure, or you take the one bid and you go for it. So again, it's not good for competition. The single bidding rate increased from 23.5% in 2011 to 41.8% in 2021. At the same time, the average number of bidders decreased from 5.7% to 3.2%. And I think this also illustrates well that competition is decreasing, that there's less interest in public contracts. The single bidding rate EU-wide increased from 22% to 43% over the 10 years period. Slovenia here had the highest single bidding rate with more than 70%, whereas Malta at the bottom has the lowest single bidding rate with some 12%. I think interesting to notice that there are only 3 countries who are below the 20% red flag threshold that the Commission set, and these are Finland, Sweden, and Malta. You have differences between member states. The situation is not homogeneous across the member states. It's often also not homogeneous if you look into the specific member state. So if you look, for instance, at the country presented here in yellow on the bottom, Belgium, you can see that for Wallonia and Brussels Capital, the single bidding rate is very high, whereas in the area of Flanders, where you have a very well-functioning, busy economy, the single bidding rate is much lower. So you have differences between the member states, you have differences between economic sectors, but even within the member states, you have differences between regions. So if you really want to tackle the problem, you need to go at different levels with your analysis of reasons behind limited competition. So if you now look at the different sectors, also for single bidding, you can see that in almost, or I think even in all sectors, the rate of single bidding, the share of single bidding procedures increased, which is not good, of course, for competition. But the dramatic news, I would say, is that for 7 out of the 10 sectors that we present here, the single bidding rate almost doubled. So really there was a steep increase in single bidding amongst all these economic sectors. Now, cross-border public procurement was mentioned before today. Cross-border is important for the internal market in our traditional understanding. The rate of direct cross-border exchanges between member states remained at a level of some 5%. Before 2011, it was even less. It was 2-3%. Between 2011 and 2021, it remained relatively stable at the level of 5%, which we believe is not a lot. I must add here that we only could conclude on direct cross-border exchanges. There will be indirect cross-border exchanges also because many mother companies, of course, have their subsidiary companies in other member states. And then if they do business with the national contracting authorities there, it's not catched. We cannot catch it on the basis of the existing data as a cross-border exchange. It remains a national exchange because this is not specified in TED. So the real percentage of cross-border exchanges probably is higher, or certainly is higher, but we cannot measure it because we don't have the data for that. Nevertheless, what you can see if you look at Belgium, Ireland, and Luxembourg at the bottom, these are the countries that have the highest extent of cross-border exchanges. And one specificity of these countries, of course, is that either they are multilingual in their daily business, which would be the case for Belgium and Luxembourg, with French and German, of course, and then Flanders and Luxembourgish. So for them, it's more easy to have exchanges with their neighbor countries, or with Ireland, of course, the main economic partner is the UK, so they speak even the same language. So we think that the language barrier still is an important obstacle to cross-border exchanges. And I fully accept that cross-border exchanges, if we discuss it today, have their downsides too. You presented an example in your speech, But of course, I mean, in the internal market and on the basis of the directives, cross-border exchange, stimulate cross-border exchange, stimulate exchange between the different member states in the internal market was an important objective. Now, another objective of the directives was to simplify, to reduce the administrative burden. And of course, with TED data, we cannot directly measure to which extent the world was simplified or the procedures were simplified. I catch from all the feedback that I got in the course of the audit and also that I got today that at least there is no big feeling of having simplified procedures nowadays. On the basis of data, we can say that the average procedure of public procurement procedures, the average duration of public procurement procedures increased from 62.5 days in 2011 to 96.4 days in 2021, so an increase by 50%. And I mean, this also is an indication for the fact that the procedures did not really become faster and more easy or more simple. Now, if you look at strategic public procurement, something that is becoming more and more important in the discussion and also in the legislation, what we have seen is that over the period 2011 to 2021, price still is the main award criterion. And for 8 of the 27 member states, the procedures or the contracts that are awarded on the basis of price even are above 80%. So the clear dominant award criteria is still price. And it was interesting when we had a discussion at the council on Monday this week, when we presented this report to the council, that the German representative raised their hand and said, yes, but we would like to clarify that there's nothing wrong about having price as the award criteria. The Court of Auditors is criticizing that, but we would like to stress that price is a very valid and good price criterion and that we should not criticize that. Okay. If I need to replace my heating system at home, of course, price is interesting to me too, but I have different options. I can go for the cheapest heating system that my company would offer me, that would be gas. I can go for the most expensive one, a pump or whatever, that would be 50 or 60,000. I also could maybe go for a hybrid solution that combines gas with solar for 20,000. So it's always a question of what you want. But what you won't get, now thinking again about competition, is that you get the heat pump for the price of the pure gas system. And this is what I think we have to keep in mind, that the world is changing, that price is not the only criterion anymore, that the environment became, as an example, so important, and that we really, as it was said earlier, have to include in our daily thinking that it's not all only about price, it's also about meat, it's also about resilience, it's about sustainability. And I fully accept that also the Court of Auditors, the Commission have to play a role there when they do their audits, also to support and to encourage member states to take part of this shift in paradigm in thinking, and to include the sustainable thinking more in the design of award criteria. So coming back to the objectives, we couldn't see on the basis of our data analysis an increase in SME participation. There are countries where the share of SME contractors and SME bids overall increased, like Austria, for instance. There are countries where it decreased, like Sweden, for instance. But overall, we did not see that the 2014 directives contributed to an increase in SME participation. Another objective was digitalization, to digitalize procedure. In order to digitalize and then also to monitor what's going on, you need good data. And here I have some good news. If you look at this figure that we published in our report, it shows that the values that are missing in the mandatory fields in TED, or the extent of values missing, is decreasing. So overall, TED data as regards the mandatory fields became more complete over the period, and the Commission Publications Office did a good job here by, for instance, introducing embedding by introducing input controls that make sure that only if the values are there, the registration in the system can be completed. On the other hand, I also think that the data is not fit for purpose, is still incomplete as regards information, particularly also that is not yet mandatory, but would be so very much important to monitor public procurement behavior, public procurement performance, but also to inform the public. If you look at the left of this figure, these first two columns, they are about the national registration numbers and they are about estimated award values. For what reason ever, these are still non-mandatory fields. So fields that member states under the directive have to complete only on a voluntary basis. Now, of course, if there's no obligation to introduce national registration numbers in the system, it's difficult to monitor and to follow where the money goes, which companies get the money. It's difficult to follow for monitoring purposes by public administrations. It's difficult to follow also for competitors of companies who got the contracts. And for the estimated award value, I mean, if the estimated award value is not put in the system, it's difficult, of course, for the potential bidders to understand the volume of the contract. So again, we consider that this non-mandatory field is a very important one, and we would appreciate if particularly these two data sets would become mandatory in the future. Lack of data relevance. We believe that TED could be used to collect data that is suitable or more suitable for analysis. I think we need EU-wide unique identifiers to see really where the money goes, and also to identify better cross-border exchanges. We need more information on price to see also the relationship between competition and price, for instance, would be very much interesting and would benefit transparency if information about the peer procedures would be collected in a more systematic manner. And if you really want to go for a detailed analysis, as I said before, you need to do also regional analysis, and for that also regional information would be appreciated. And of course, we are aware of the need to find the balance between obtaining better data or data, which is an administrative burden, but on the other hand, then really also the possibility to do something with this data and to have actions in place that stimulate competition in the internal market and on public procurement. What was interesting was that many of the stakeholders that we consulted, contracting authorities, business representatives, challenged still integrity and transparency of public procurement. So public procurement involves large amounts of public money. And there's, of course, a risk of fraud and corruption. And transparency, therefore, is crucial to monitor and control processes and to hold decision makers accountable. Transparency also contributes to open public procurement and thus competition. And lack of transparency and integrity is still considered as one of the important obstacles to competition in public procurement. There is still, in many of the member states, a lack of trust in public authorities, and there's this perception that, wow, whether I deliver the bid or not, it's clear from the beginning anyway who will get the contract. So what should I prepare the bid and invest in that? I anyway won't get the contract. So trust in public authorities is an issue. And I think this is really an important task for public authorities to demonstrate better and in a more transparent way how they award their contracts. During 2011 and 2021, more than half of the EU 27 member states had consistently an unsatisfactory publication rate below 5%. This is the red flag value used by the Commission, and more than 40% of our survey respondents do not monitor the publication rate. So publication rate is what you publish on public contracts in comparison to GDP. There are even better indicators for transparency. This is the indicator that the European Commission used. And anyway, on the basis also of this indicator, we believe that by far not everything that should be published is published yet in TED. And brought to the knowledge of the potential bidder and companies. Conclusion of the trend analysis in relation to the achievement of the directives objectives. In our opinion, the EU 2014 public procurement directives, on the basis of the data that we have analyzed, have had no demonstrable effect on competition, simplification, strategic use, SME participation, digitalization, and transparency of the public procurement procedures. I will skip the next part, which is on strengths and weaknesses of Commission and Member State monitoring tools for the sake of time. But the conclusion here clearly is that the monitoring tools in place at the Commission, in place in the Member States, are not convincing, show considerable weaknesses, and that neither Commission nor Member State, on the basis of the existing tools, are yet in a position to really effectively monitor competition and analyze reasons for limited competition public procurement. When it comes to root causes, this is of course the question: why is competition limited in public procurement? Why was competition decreasing over the 10 years period? One reason might be the complicated set of objectives and the multiple objectives that were put in the 2014 directives. We have the objective of simplification, we have the objective of transparency. Now, of course, what would be the most simple is to go for direct award. You give the contract to the company that you know and that delivered good quality in the past. Okay, that would be very easy from an administrative point of view, but in terms of transparency, it would be a disaster. Same for simplification versus competition. You can go for the company you know you will get a good service, very good, but it kills competition, of course, obviously. If you go to the last line, price versus strategic. Of course, if you introduce strategic policy objectives in your award criteria, you cannot expect anymore to get the cheapest price. So the heating example that I used in a simplified manner before. So there are many different objectives in the directives, which are not necessarily complementary or even contradict each other or conflict with each other. Clear is that public procurement overall is not sufficiently attractive. If businesses can do business to business, then they go for that instead of business to public or public to business, because business to business is more easy. You don't have the complex procedures, you can sit together, you can talk, you can negotiate, you can together find out the best solution, whereas as a company, if you want to go for a public contract, in most of the cases, you communicate with a letterbox. Yeah, there is the award, there is the contract notice, and you know what you have to bid for, and then you prepare your bid and you put it in the letterbox, and that is it. No communication. And this is considered as one of the main handicaps or downsides of public contracts, that bidders do not have the possibility to open communicate with the contracting authorities. There still is this perception of fraud and corruption that impacts trust. I was referring to that already. And of course, also at the part of the contracting authorities and also at the part of businesses, when it comes to this performance aspect, there are still considerable administrative capacity problems that may affect the ability of contracting authorities and also bidders to carry out procurements together effectively and efficiently. So it's a lot about administrative capacity. The design of the procedures is crucial, of course. The choice of selection and award criteria, division into lots and technical specificities, that's clear. Of course, not everything can be influenced by those doing the public procurements. There are also trends that we have to recognize towards higher market concentration that we, as contracting authorities, have to accept to a certain extent, and that have an impact on the competition that you can expect. And of course, also the economic situation overall plays a role. If the economy is booming and there is enough private demand, companies might prefer to go for private business partners, whereas when the economy is going down and there's not so much private demand, then of course public contracts could become more interesting again. This part is very short. Corrective actions taken by Commission and member states to stimulate competition. We didn't see much, neither at the level of the Commission nor at the level of the member states. And we had the impression somehow everybody felt at the Commission and also in the member states that there's something wrong about competition in public procurement, that the number of offers received is too small, but nobody really did something about it. No analysis, no mitigating action. So this part is very short. We did not identify a lot here. And that brings me to my last slide, which is on recommendations. We at the court, as the result of all our audits, draw conclusions, but then also make recommendations to the Commission and sometimes also to the member states on how to mitigate the issues or the risks that we have identified through our audit. And then after 3 years' time, we go back to the Commission and we check with the Commission what was done in order to implement our recommendations. And in a simplified manner, we recommend the Commission that first of all, it should clarify and prioritize in cooperation with the member states the public procurement objectives. What really is the objective of public procurement? What do we want to achieve through public procurement? Is public procurement a tool to support policy objectives? Should it rather be the regulation of products, then a further regulation of the procedures to support policy objectives? So think about the objectives and try to clarify and prioritize them. Then address shortcomings of public procurement data. So once the objectives are clarified, I think the Commission together with the member states need to agree on what data is necessary, but also unavoidable to monitor public procurement in a way that you can influence it. Then we invite the Commission, of course, to update its tools to better monitor competition in public procurement and to deepen the root cause analysis of obstacles to public procurement competition or competition in public procurement, and to forward measures to overcome these obstacles and promote best practice. And we were happy to see that the Commission accepted all our recommendations. I must say that we had a very constructive cooperation with the Commission in this audit or in the course of this audit. And really, as an auditor, you come and you know, of course, that nobody's waiting for you. But whether we spoke to the member states, whether we spoke to the Commission, this was really a situation, an audit where we had the impression that people were waiting for someone to look into it and to put the issue on the table. Now, solutions are not easy, of course not, but it was an interesting task. I think we have interesting findings. We triggered quite a debate. We were invited to OECD, Sorbonne, business organizations, Parliament, Council to present the report. So we feel that in a way it was that there was a need to trigger the discussion on competition in public procurement. Today it's about celebrating the directive. Whenever you have a party, you also want to have good discussions. My objective was not to spoil the party, but rather to contribute to the discussion. And I thank you all very much for your attention.